Hey guys, and welcome back to another one after a long break. This one is going to be another one about Gnosticism and the Transformers movies. And it comes about because I was really gripped by the conversation between Sam Adams and John Vervake. Sam brings up his proposal, a loose proposal of what Gnosticism is, and I think it's very succinct. And when I heard it, it immediately made me think of the Transformers 4 and 5 movies specifically. So I'm going to jump to a scene where Sam and Vervake are talking about this.
Things, it is appropriate to attribute functions to them. And where we
Hmm.
want to attribute functions, there's that. Now, I think, if you'll allow me, evolution, right? Evolution itself isn't purposeful, but it's functioning for the purposeful nature of the living things within it. And
Hmm.
that's how I would.
Okay.
That's how I would think about it, right? Um,
This might seem slightly irrelevant to our original thing, but I'll tie this back in sort of an interesting way. I I saw a debate discussion between Richard Dawkins and Brett Weinstein one time.
yeah,
This
yeah.
back before COVID. They were in Chicago, and I'm in Chicago, so I went and saw that. And I think that so if Christianity and Neoplatonism are close siblings, there's a third sibling in the family of Gnosticism that
Very much.
is
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
also interconnected with
Oh,
it,
totally,
and
totally.
it's sort of the estranged sibling in many ways. But
Yes.
if I could, like Gnosticism would often say that somehow something wrong in the cascade of being happened,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah,
Either there was a malevolent god, right, subordinate to the main god, or
yeah.
some god acted in ignorance, or some
Yep, yep,
either badness or ignorance, or some combination of those things led to where we are now, right?
yep.
Whereas a Neoplatonist would say, no, it's a cascade of goodness, right? Maybe there are degrees of goodness, but there's not a bad step somewhere in the process. And Christianity is actually interesting in that it says, well, the creation process was good, but there's badness in the creation now,
Yeah,
right? Yeah,
it,
yeah.
it tries to split the difference. Yeah, very
Right,
much.
right.
Yeah,
So there is badness, but it wasn't in the cascade, or that caused us to come into being. It was sort of after that, right? And so what I think is interesting, connecting that idea to Brett Weinstein and a lot of sort of like Sam Harris, I think will say these sorts of things, that basically evolution is sort of like this malevolent force in their imagination. That
yeah,
Brett Weinstein will say evolution is a cosmic spelling bee that ends in genocide or something like that,
yeah,
and
yeah,
that we need to transcend our programming to escape it, as if it has this
yeah,
meta purpose to it
yeah,
that
yeah.
is somehow we can recognize as evil from where we're standing now.
That's very
And
interesting.
I think that it's strangely gnostic
Austin. Yeah,
in that kind
totally.
of way.
So totally.
And
I think that's brilliant what you're saying. Brilliant.
mhm. And it's sort of like we need to transcend our programming. Okay, so how are we doing that? Like the Gnostics at least said we can hopscotch the bad God to get back to the good God, right?
Right, right,
Yeah,
right.
we were made by a bad God, but perhaps our soul or our mind or something is good, and we need to,
Yeah, yeah,
jump back up
yeah, yeah.
the ladder to the good rungs and escape the bad rungs. But without anything like that, I don't understand how sort of the kind of pretty strictly materialistic evolution is a malevolent force that has there's
Yeah,
something in it that desires badness. It desires genocide, it desires death, it desires competition, it desires conquering of the fittest and that sort of thing.
yeah. And Stanovich does something within cognitive psychology very similar. He talks about the robot's rebellion. He's very influenced by Dennett's idea of means,
Mm-hmm.
and Dawkins' selfish gene. But what I can say again is biology, cutting edge biology, philosophy of biology is really abandoning those models to a very significant degree. Um, I agree with you, and it sort of reminds me of Jung's idea that the default spirituality of human beings is Gnosticism.
Mm-hmm.
because it's a way of projecting a narrative that redeems you from your insignificance and your powerlessness. It gives you a central role. And I have a very ambivalent attitude towards Gnosticism, because I think I agree with Hans Jonas. The Gnostics are sort of like proto-existentialists. They're talking about how we often find ourselves caught in sort of existential ignorance and existential inertia. We're stuck. That's a common thing people say when they go into therapy. We're stuck and we don't know how to get unstuck, and we don't know who we really are. And so we seek gnosis. We seek the kind of knowing, deeply participating in ourselves that will heal us from our existential inertia, our existential ignorance. So I'm very interested in gnosis, and I'm interested in the Gnostics because they were creating this mythos that were trying to give expression to that. But I'm also very critical of them because they're sort of like you said, it's a pervasive temptation of human thought that puts us into what Jules Evans calls conspirituality. There's a grand conspiracy, right? And spirituality is a response to the grand conspiracy. And so I really appreciate what you just said. I thought that was really beautiful. And first of all, it shows how people like Weinstein and others are deeply, deeply spiritual and even mythopoetic without realizing it. So congratulations on that. I think that's a very well said thing. I'm gonna keep that. I've made.
Okay, so what we see in that scene is Sam gives a very succinct explanation of what Gnosticism is, and Vervake agrees with his definition of Gnosticism. Well, how does this play into the Transformers franchise, and specifically number 4 and number 5? So I would say in the middle of the 4th movie, we find out that Transformers were created, and Lockdown, which you'll notice in my previous video, is there to get Prime to take him back to Cybertron to meet his creator. Well, in the 5th movie, at the very end of the 4th movie, Optimus leaves to go back to Cybertron to meet this creator. And when he gets back, in the beginning of the 5th movie, he learns some things. And one of the things that he learns is that the creator god is this evil, she's an archetype of evil, and her name is Quintessa. Okay, Quintessa was created by someone who came before her, known as Primus, and she was created as his wife. Well, Primus also had a brother known as Unicron. Unicron had betrayed Primus, and with the help of Quintessa. So they got into a battle. Neither one of them won, but Primus was able to banish Unicron, and he became the planet Earth, whereas Primus became the planet Cybertron. So what Quintessa tries to do is spin the story, and she has some sort of power over the Transformers, being their creator. She has a mind control power. What she does is she spins the story to Optimus Prime that, yes, Unicron is the ancient enemy of Cybertron, but she claims that her staff that was stolen from her by the 12 Primes, which it was, that this staff, if if Optimus will take control of it, will drain the power from Unicron so that they can rebuild Cybertron. Now, the secret that she doesn't let him in on is, while yes, this would technically rob the power from Unicron, it would also use that power to turn Primus into Unicron. Because, for all intents and purposes, Unicron isn't dead, but there's not another way to wake him other than to rob him of all of his power and use it to recreate him in the form of Primus. Now, the Primes, the 12 that were her protectors that stole her staff, you could say were the first enlightened of their species. So they woke up to the game that was being played, they became enlightened, and they betrayed Quintessa. So one might say that, in the nice way that Sam puts it, the 12 Primes were the first ones to transcend their programming. Because make no mistake about it, after this battle between Unicron and... So, in essence, in the words of Sam, what you could say is that the first Primes, their objective was they realized that their creator god was a bad god, as Gnostics would say, and what they were doing by transcending their program is hopscotching the bad god to get back to the good god. And that bad god would be Quintessa, and the good one would be Primus. Programming. Because make no mistake about it, after this battle between Unicron and Primus, and they both fall into this altered state where neither one of them are conscious, Quintessa takes over. And she begins to start having her creations go out, and they use this giant, think of it as a tactical nuke, but what it does is it transforms all living organic matter on a planet into transformium, which is what the Transformers are made out of. So at the beginning of the fourth movie, you see this taking place back at the time of the dinosaurs. They're actually terraforming planet Earth for its natural resources. And this is the kind of person Quintessa is. She doesn't care about the fact that the person that helped her, or the other being that helped her betray Primus, is at the center of Earth. Like, that makes no difference to her. She's willing to terraform him in order to make more like him, because she knows that before it's all said and done, she can go back and rob his power and recreate him in the form of Primus. So in the fourth movie, we see that happening, and quite instinctively, these tactical nukes that they're using to terraform are known as seeds. And if that sounds familiar, it's because it should. In biblical terms, in Old Testament, everything was about the seed, the promised seed of Abraham, the seed line, all these references to seed, and this is exactly where we see it showing up in here. And it's also quite interesting because it reminds me of the story of Tiamat and Apsu. The goddess of the underworld, she takes her husband, and they create all these gods, and then the children destroy. They kill the father god, and they're living on his corpse, and yet this one has a little bit of a plot twist to it with Quintessa, right? Because she is a being that could care less about, well, I don't want to say she could care less, but she would be willing to let Unicron suffer to the point where she could rob him of all of his power only to recreate him, but in a form that she could control. And that's what makes her different from that other story. Yeah, I think that's all I have to say about this one. If you guys haven't seen the first one in the first video in this, I'll put it in the description. And also, I highly suggest that you watch Transformers 4 and 5 to get a better grasp of what these are. Anyways, thanks guys. See you next time.